Hello and welcome to my channel. You know, the world is always talking about how we can be better and get better and always pushing us to be this ultimate version of ourselves. But there is no way that we do that absent the power of God. And it happens as we build, establish, and grow through our faith. We're going to talk about it in today's video. Let's go.
Sunday. Sunday, 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 Sunday.
Welcome to Lunchtime Live. I'm so glad to see so many of you who are joining me for this lunchtime review of our International Sunday School lesson, which is titled The Faith of Abraham. My name is Waynell Henson. For those of you that I've not met before, I want to welcome you to this channel. This is That Sunday School Girl, and we seek to help you be prepared as the best students and best teachers that you can be. And even some of you who are just in this space because you are appreciating the study of God's word as you seek to grow and develop in your own personal spaces. So I'm so excited to have you. If you are new around here, allow me to say welcome. You have just joined the largest cyber community of Sunday school students on the World Wide Web. This is also still the most engaged community on YouTube, and I appreciate the fact that you allow me to serve you. For more than 6 years now, we've been in this space changing the way that people see Sunday school. So I love you all. I love this community. If you're a newbie, make sure that you click the subscribe button that's down below. Don't want you to miss any of the content that's uploaded on this channel. So make sure to take that extra step and also click the notifications bell so that you'll receive an email every time there is content that is downloaded or uploaded on this channel. Or even like now, if I just go live, you will always get a notification. Again, super happy that you're here. This is our lunchtime live review. So many of you started with us on Monday. Markup Monday is where we go live every Monday night at 7:00 p.m. Central Standard Time. I share with you a free template that you're able to download, and we just sit together and read through the lesson. That's it. We're not there being Bible scholars. We don't explain the lesson. We literally take that document and mark it up. That's why it's called Markup Monday, to become our own personal study plans for the week. And then we take that and go and dig into the Word of God for ourselves. And then we come back into this space where we actually just review the lesson together. I share with you what I've seen in the lesson. I can see your comments, and you're able to download, if you're ever interested, a copy of my personal study notes. They are in the description box for this video, and we're able just to compare so that we can have the most robust discussions possible on Sunday. But again, the Word of God for me is even more than just class on Sunday. I literally want to sit with this word so that it makes me better. I challenged you all on Markup Monday, especially as we go through this series in Romans, to make sure that you are not just able to explain this lesson out of your intellectual capacity, but literally ask God, where does this lesson hit me? And how can I sit inside of this so that I can take it and make the absolute most out of it? Now, you do see that I'm in a different space today. So most of you recognize this background. If you've been here for a while, you recognize that I am in Kansas City. I'm at Mom's house. So I'm super glad to be here, and I get to do our convocation in Kansas East jurisdiction of the Church of God in Christ is this week. So I get to be here for the weekend with my family, and I'm happy about it. I see some newbies here. Hey, Sister Patrice, glad that you're catching Lunchtime Live for the first time. All right, so we are looking at the faith of Abraham. Oh, wait, one more thing. Whoa, what? How could I forget to tell you? September 17th and 18th is Step Summit 2021. I cannot forget to tell you that. Like every time you see me for the next 6 or 7 weeks, I'm going to tell you about it. Because if you are a pastor, a superintendent, a Christian education leader, a teacher, if you're a staff member, you do not want to miss Step Summit 2021. I encourage you to visit Step Summit. That's with 2 S's. Sunday school teachers equipped for purpose. And there are definitely, we're pretty close to 18, maybe even 20 options of courses that you will be able to take advantage of if you are looking for training as you seek to not only improve in your kingdom assignment, but if you're really looking at how do I take this to the next level, especially as we look at what does it look like and what does it mean to minister as we come out of this pandemic? What are people looking for? How can we deliver the best? What tools and resources. It is the place for you. So please get registered. The VIP registration is going to close on August the 1st. You will still be able to register, but after August the 1st, you will only be able to gain the digital access, and you will not be eligible for anything that is mailed. And our mailer is always a lot of fun. For those who are VIP, you will miss that if you're not registered by August the 1st. All right, I'm ready to talk about the faith of Abraham. Sister Danette, I see your message, and I will respond to you by email this afternoon. I think I saw your note yesterday, but I may have been driving. I drove to Kansas City, so I'm sorry. All right, the faith of Abraham. The Bible basis is Romans chapter 4, verses 1 through 12. The Bible truth. Paul asserts that Abraham was justified by faith, and his faith was counted as righteousness. Our memory verse is verse 3. And at the end of this lesson, the lesson aim is that we will agree with the difference between faith and works as manifested by evidence in the life of Abraham, reflect on the knowledge and wisdom of Paul as seen in his understanding of the Old Testament, and identify ways in which we rely on our faith for a relationship with God as his faith and works are in concert. Let me go ahead and read, and then we can talk through this lesson together. Romans chapter 4, verses 1 through 12. What shall we say then that Abraham our father as pertaining to the flesh hath found? For if Abraham were justified by works, he hath wherefore to glory, but not before God. For what saith the scripture? Abraham believed God, and it was counted unto him for righteousness. Now to him that worketh is the reward not reckoned of grace, but of debt. But unto him that worketh not, believeth on him that justifieth the ungodly, his faith is counted for righteousness. Even as David also describeth the blessedness of a man unto whom God imputeth righteousness without works, saying, blessed are they whose iniquities are forgiven and whose sins are covered. Blessed is the man to whom the Lord will not impute sin. Cometh this blessedness upon the circumcision only, or upon the circumcision also? The uncircumcision also, for we say that faith was reckoned to Abraham for righteousness. How was it reckoned then? When he was in circumcision or in uncircumcision? Not in circumcision, but in uncircumcision. But he received the sign of circumcision, a seal of righteousness of the faith which he had yet being uncircumcised, that he might be the father of them all that believeth, though they be not circumcised, that righteousness might be imputed unto them also. And the father of the circumcision to them that are not of circumcision only, but also walk in the steps of the faith of our father Abraham, which he had yet being uncircumcised. This is our reading. And we agreed on Markup Monday that this was a very King Jamesy passage. There is a lot to chop through in this lesson. This is one of those where I hope you didn't just read through and give up, or even read at a surface level, because it's tough. This was a lot to work through. This is our second week in the book of Romans. And let me just tell you that the way I parsed through this, it helped me, but my delivery may be a little bit different today because I literally had to look more at background and even working up to these spaces. And I think the daily readings have helped a lot, but to kind of think about, like, how does Paul get here? Like, to just jump in at verse 1 of chapter 4 and to figure out where this train is going, you literally needed to go back and see what was going on. So it is said that old habits die hard. So when you think about Paul, he's the writer. We established that last week. By the way, we'll be in Romans for 2 more weeks, so keep your background handy. That Paul is writing to the Romans. He's never been there before. We found out last week that he's desired to come to Rome, and we found out all those reasons in last week's lesson. If you missed last week, go back and get that lesson. Go back to my video from Sunday, because he talks about why he wants to be there. But also, as he continues to write, he's literally pushing them to think differently. And sometimes it's difficult to push outside of old thoughts and old habits and old behaviors. And specifically in his case, welcome, Sister Patsy. In his case, it was, what does it truly mean to accept the grace of God? And he's writing to people who have some very different thoughts about that. Now, Rome was no small place. It was like the center of commerce and culture and lots of diversity. So inside of that diversity, and diversity is more than just like skin color and that type of thing. It literally is the diversity of thought. And some of their diversity of thought came from the different groups of people and how they would have been reared or not reared religiously in any kind of faith-based context. So he's writing to different communities that make up this area that's called Rome. This audience, different backgrounds, different experiences, different convictions. So as a writer, what we're going to see is that he's kind of always anticipating. It's like he's writing to these three different mentalities, and that he's being very direct, but then he'll kind of pull back almost as if to say, I kind of hear in your head what you're thinking, and let me answer you about that too. So he's a very, very skilled writer. He's writing to non-believers. He's writing to people who have been reared in a faith context. He's even writing to people who are morally, like, they're just good people. They believe in doing the right thing and being good people, but they've had no real heart experience with God. There's nothing about their heart posture that matches the things that they do. So now, as I look at this lesson throughout history, welcome, Sister Willie Mae, throughout history, people have, and yes, Mrs. Bynes, it is perfectly fine. I appreciate you for sharing. In fact, that's a great question for everybody. Yes, share this video, share it in your spaces, share it in your personal areas and in your Sunday school spaces. Please share it. And don't forget to click that thumbs up like button. I didn't tell you that part. So throughout history, people have always grappled with, in fact, we do it even now. What is this idea of being right with God? How do I do that? How do I know that I live a life that pleases God, a life that satisfies God, a life that at the end, when he makes an evaluation of me, when he thinks about Waynell, what are those things that I do? How do I live? So again, we know from last week's lesson that these people in Rome have heard the gospel. They have some idea in many spaces about the gospel because as people went and came back, they would bring the messages back in. So they've heard, but now Paul is still layering on this information. And that's why I told you last week, Romans is this incredible book that you can literally read year after year, because there's something that you're going to pick up that helps you mature inside of your own Christian journey and what that looks like. So he is now talking to these people who need still to expand their idea, their understanding even of the gospel, and the fact that we saw this last week, that the gospel is for everyone. Remembering again that these people, some of them have been reared in a religious context. They've gone to the synagogue since they were children, and yet they need to understand that that is not reserved for you, that you're not some special class of people because you've done that, that here we are in this space where God makes this available, his grace, his gift available to everyone. So the style of the writing is persuasive. It's persuasive because he is trying to persuade them to see their faith and their relationship with God and with others even in a new way. And I also sort of called it corrective. And I don't mean it in the sense of like a naughty correction, but sometimes you just need bad understanding to be corrected. And that's what he's doing here. And getting our understanding corrected is what helps us to live more successful lives. So the Romans, they've been influenced by politics, they're influenced by religion, and the way they view the world is largely on what you do. It's your work. And so they applied that thought to their faith. And that's why I think it's so interesting. Like, I believe that as we study and we grow in this word, that's why these Bible lessons, Sunday school is important, because as opposed to taking a worldly view and layering it into my faith space, I literally build myself in my faith and allow it to influence how I live in those other spaces. But the Romans didn't have it that way. They were reared to believe that if they worked enough and if they followed the law, that was the thing that essentially made them right with God. Now, Paul could understand this, right? He even says in Philippians chapter 3, verses 5 and 6, he talks about, hey, I was reared to do the right thing. I was circumcised on the 8th day, born of the tribe of Benjamin, Hebrew born. He goes on and on about all of these things that technically should have made him a worthy and an acceptable and a good guy. And he's even explaining there, but there was more, right? So that's what he's trying to tell these Romans, that those who, even I, Paul says, at some point, I believe too that it was all about what you do. But now that I'm in this place of better understanding, remember he said last week, like, it's my debt, it's my responsibility. I got to help you. And I want to let you know that there is more to this that gets us in right relationship. Now, I've already told you his arguments are complex. Hello, Reverend Flowers. Hello, Asa Sims. His arguments are complex. And that's why even as I read, you heard me kind of, oh, the circumcised and the uncircumcised and the this and the that. Like, it's a lot. But what he is doing is really pushing against these very cemented ideas. And sometimes when people get something in their heads and they begin to make it their area of comfort, it's difficult to help them see it in a different way. So he's pushing back on these really old ideas. Now, before we jump into chapter 4, let's also talk about some words we're going to see. And I thank Evangelist Allen for telling us to get a dictionary out this week. She told us that on Markup Monday, to get the idea of being justified and this idea of imputed. And we're going to see this in scripture. So I give you definitions of justified and imputed in the notes. I always talk about justification as being treated just as if I never sinned. It's technically like a legal declaration that sort of declares you free and without responsibility for what you have done in the past and makes you right with God. So keep that in mind as we go through this, because we're going to see, what did it take for even Abraham to be declared just as if he had never sinned, to be justified? And what does it mean to have something imputed to you? That means basically to receive credit or value for something that it's added to you. So keep that in mind as we go into chapter 4. Now, again, can't just jump into chapter 4. Chapter 4, as we look at, so what shall we say then that Abraham, our father, as pertaining to the flesh, hath found? Well, that comes from somewhere, right? There is an overarching question. The Romans are struggling with the idea of being made right. And even today, people struggle with that. I told you we grapple with that because some people still see it as, it's what I do. I give to charity. I'm a mentor. You know, I try to be nice to people. That's great. But he's still saying that there is more. So he's been addressing that. What does it take? And not only that, like, who qualifies to be made right? Who qualifies for this right relationship, right standing with God? I mean, do the Gentiles have to adopt the ways of the Jews to be made right, or to be considered part of the family of God? Or what does it take for them to be the beneficiaries of the promises of Abraham? And it's just so interesting that the Jews wanted to demand so much of what does it take when they themselves, as God's chosen people, we saw this, I think, in last quarter, that God's chosen people with all of this promise written over their lives, with all that God had done from them, bringing them out of Egypt, out of slavery, into the land of milk and like they, with everything that God wanted to do for them, they themselves failed God a lot. Like, that's what the Old Testament is laden with, is the stories of how they failed again and again. And yet they were really protective as it related to others who did not live in ways that were as perfect as they saw the world to be. So I just thought that was interesting that, you know, they had this kind of, you know, wanting to keep others out, or at least to know what does it take for them to be like us. Also keep in mind as we read chapter 4, that this is not like, if you just water this down to it's just a faith and works, you know, which is which, it's so much more than that. They're trying to understand, just like some of us are, how does salvation work? And not only how does it work, but Paul is not talking about just the mechanics of it, not just the I went to the altar and I made a decision and I gave God my heart, but how then does it work in us? So not just how does it work with me saying a thing, but then how does that decision, how does that heart posture work in my own everyday life? And he argues this. It's not just the capacity of what we do. It is the faith that we have. It's what we believe. So again, he's continuing this argument that's actually been going on the entire time he's been writing. He started this argument back in chapter 1, and he's laid out all this foundation. And in chapter 3, let me speed this up. In chapter 3, that's where he explains justification. I've given you a definition for that, what it means to be put into right relationship with God. And as we're in chapter 4, these questions that he opens with are really intended to draw the reader, draw the hearer, draw us into a space that's really analytical. Like, we need to consider something. And Paul writes writes in the form of questions because his style is to raise a conversation. He'll raise a notion and then he knocks it down with what is true. He raises what you think and then he knocks down with truth. So again, he in chapter 3 has talked about, look at verse 21, that God has shown us a way to be made right with him without keeping the requirements of the law, as he promised it to the prophets, that there was this faith work that would be done. And he said the work would be done through Jesus Christ. And if that then was the promise of God, where is it that anybody would be able to boast? Like he asked that in chapter 3, I think verse 27. Where is boasting? Is God only the God of the Jews only and not the Gentiles? No, he's the God of all. So he's emphasizing this idea of faith. But then he asked the question, does having faith mean that we do away with the law? And his answer at the end of chapter 3 is absolutely not. This is not an either or situation, but he's arguing how the both of them actually complement each other. But go back. The reason that I read for you verse 21 is he says, God has shown us a way to be made right with him without keeping the requirements of the law, as he promised the prophets. For real? He did that? Where did he promise the prophets that? And immediately in chapter 4, we are now into a space that's almost like a court of law where he raises and presents evidence in the form of two people. He gives two people. Remember, I told you last week that when you have a rule, you can know what the rule is. And the rule is in chapter 3, verse 21, that God has shown us a way to be made right with him without the requirements of the law, as he promised the prophets. Here comes the actual evidence. And when I look at evidence, I should be able to take the rule and apply it and see it played out. And he does that with two very different people, different kinds of people. The first one is Abraham, right? Abraham was the father of Israel. He was the model of faith, and he was righteous. He was made righteous. He was put in right relationship with God. Now, this is actually a really wild thought, because Abraham, although he is considered the father of the Jews, was actually born a Gentile. He was the son of Terah from Ur. If you take a look at his background, he was born a Gentile. And as you look at these questions in chapter 4, there are a couple things that he's asking. Was Abraham, he's our father, right? That's one question. We agree that Abraham was our father. And why do we say he was our father? Do we say he was our father because of a blood relationship? Well, no, that a lot of you are not related by blood. Was it the physical sign of circumcision? Well, no, it is because of the commonality of faith. And that's what our lesson talks about, right? This faith that Abraham, that he trusted in God's promise. That's the conclusion. If it's not a blood relationship, what ties all people to this ability to be connected to Abraham is our faith. Paul also asked a question. What did Abraham gain by anything that he did? Specifically, what he's asking, was it the fact that he followed the law of God that made him right? And the answer, in short, is nothing. The reason we're looking at two different kinds of men is Abraham was made right with God. This is kind of a mental sparring on Paul's part, because it's kind of one of those questions that makes you go, Because if Abraham was made right and he honored God, and God counted his belief and his faith for righteousness, he did all of this before the law of Moses was ever even written. So Abraham was not celebrated as a father of the law, but he is celebrated as a spiritual father, as a father of faith. And that's what he's saying. It's nothing that Abraham did. It's not his work. And if that were the case, he would have bragging rights in himself. But it was God who made Abraham right with him. That's the definition of righteousness. It was God who did the work in Abraham. So kind of my summary question is, why would we call him our spiritual father if we're going to apply the rules of our flesh? And that's what Paul is pushing against. He's establishing a rule that goes completely against the rules of their flesh. And what was the basis of the justification of Abraham, right? Again, the basis, is it anything that he did? No. If he did it on his own, he would brag on his own. But he goes on to explain what that is. Now, he says in verses 4 and 5, he's talking about work. And any of us, when we go to work, if you put in work, that's kind of a contractual relationship. You work, they pay you. Every other week, once a month, whatever your pay scale is, or pay pay cycle is. They are paying you. Thank you, Asa Sims. I've never seen a super sticker before, but thank you for sharing a super sticker with me today. I appreciate that. So when you work, you expect payment, right? When they give you a paycheck every other Thursday at midnight, that was my pay cycle when I worked in corporate. That was not some little gift. That was not just them being nice. That was my agreement. When I signed on with that company, when I received my offer package, it came in the form of a contract and I agreed to that. But what Paul is explaining is that's not the relationship we have with God. He is not some employer who's looking at the hours that we work and he's giving us credit. And he's still arguing about Abraham. And he talks about what it took for Abraham to get quote unquote credit with God on his account for righteousness. He goes back to Genesis chapter 15. Abraham was 86 years old when God made him a promise. He brings Abraham outside, a man who at 86 has no children. He appears not to be able to have children. Everything about him in that moment, everything in his natural experience goes against what God is going to tell him. And he promises him that day that you will have a son. Again, a man with everything stacked against him, with no reason to hope, does not push back on God. He doesn't say anything back to God. He is grateful and receives in that moment. He accepts the fact that God has spoken and there is nothing else that needs to be done. And if you look at it, we're not even expressly told in Genesis 15 that Abraham was even a righteous man. All we learn is that he believed. And you can drop this in the comments. Believing is enough. Like that's the whole idea of this lesson, is that believing is enough. To believe God, Paul writes in verse 5, that if you believe that God does the justifying, we don't need to spend our lives trying to do works, but it is God who does the justifying. I listened to a video this week that was talking about, can people change? And especially it was asking specifically, can men change? And the answer is none of us, men or women, none of us changes on our own. Verse 5 tells us that God does the changing. The change work is justification. And that for me was such a powerful thought. We also look at the fact that salvation is not something you clock in for and keep track of your hours, but salvation is a gift. And when I look at the definition of a gift, of course, I look at legal definitions of gifts. Gifts are voluntary, and it's an immediate transfer from one to another. And it is made strictly on the generosity of the giver. And I love that. When I look at salvation, that's what it is. It is what he gives us voluntarily. When we believe, he gives it to us immediately. And it's nothing that we've done. It is strictly on the generosity of the giver. He's now gone and talked about Abraham. Here's the second person that he presents as evidence. David. David in Psalm 32 recaps what we see here in Romans chapter 4 and 6, where he talks about a man who is blessed because God gave him credit for his righteousness without his works. As David is writing in Psalm 32 and also Psalm 51, he's reflecting after his sin with Bathsheba. Right? He talks about a man whose transgressions are forgiven, whose sins are covered. David was not a perfect man. He was an individual who, even though he was born a Jew, he was not a perfect man. And God forgave him, not because of the work he did, but because of the heart posture that he had before him. So two different men, two different experiences, one man before the law, David after the law, yet their outcomes are the same, that God made both of them righteous. Paul also in here creates phone rang. He's already anticipating an objection. And I told you that he's very good about that. Because again, David, if you raise David, he was a Jew. He had kept the law from the time he was a child. He was circumcised. So surely he should have automatically been one who would have been made right. So he's asking the question, who is this blessing for? Is this for the circumcised? Is it for the uncircumcised? And that's where it gets a little Dr. Seuss for us. But let me see if I can sort of break this down just a bit. And I see you typing that believing is enough. Thank you, Pastor Sandra. Enjoy work. I'm going to get better about this 30 minutes. Faith first and then a seal. And I'm hurrying. Faith first and then a seal. That's what he's explaining about Abraham. In verse 11, what we see is that Abraham was already living out his faith before God honored him with a seal. So we can't depend on circumcision as being the only thing that God gives as a sign. Abraham was already living out his faith before God gave him a seal. Circumcision was the mark of that Israel was God's chosen or covenant people. And again, Paul believed in circumcision. He, in fact, himself had been circumcised. But what he's establishing is that Abraham was living out his faith before circumcision even happened. He's already successfully established that in Genesis 15, that was before the time of Moses, before circumcision was required. Abraham was actually circumcised, but this was when he was 99 years old, right? And you can take your own mind there about what it means to circumcise a 99-year-old man. But that's when God instructed Abraham to have his family circumcised. And that was only as a seal, sort of a seal of approval. It was a seal of his righteousness. It was nothing that he had done. And notice that the act of circumcision did not replace his faith. His faith had already been noted and celebrated. The circumcision was a lot like baptism for us. Baptism is not a sign that you have received Christ in your heart. It's not a guarantee. It's a subsequent thing that we do. You accept salvation first, and then as a result of that testimony, you are baptized. It is an outward sign. It is a subsequent thing to salvation. And so the experience with Abraham was subsequent to the display of his faith. We are saved by faith. That's kind of the crux of this entire lesson, that we, as the children of Abraham, if we look and we know that we're adopted into the family of Abraham. Oh, Sister Patrice, thank you so much for your kindness. That the same pattern works for us, that as we believe that it is not about what we do. We can't do enough. We can't earn enough, but we can certainly supply enough faith. I think it's so interesting that the Lord took an outsider like Abraham. That's why I told you he was from Ur. He was the son of a Gentile man. He takes an outsider and he cleaned him up. He made him righteous. He made him have right standing. He takes this man and tells him to look up and look in the sky. Like, as far as you can see, the stars, you can't number them. That's what will come from you. And that is where you and I sit today. We are blood and we are heirs to the promise, not because of anything that we do, but because we adopt the faith of Abraham, him being our spiritual father. The mark of our family is the fact that we have faith. The mark of the family of faith is that it is our faith. So we, no matter who you are, no matter where you've been, no matter what you've done, this is for everyone. Jew and Gentile is what Paul says. The benefit is for everyone. And today we have to know that we come into the family of God through our faith. Faith is our inheritance. And again, despite any external circumstances, Abraham believed. And I think the same for us. Despite anything else that's around, anything else that's in your background, anything else that may look like it's working against you, just supply the faith. And I looked at this with Abraham. He didn't simply believe that God existed, but he believed in the power of God. And we too have to believe so much more than that he is, but that he is, and he is active, and he's alive in us and active in us, and that he has the power that we can trust God in our lives, just like Abraham, and we can trust the outcome. That's the lesson for this week. I have a few key learnings in here that I didn't include inside of the notes. Here are a couple of them. I was thinking about Iyanla Vanzant. I never can say her name. And, she had this show, Fix My Life. And there are so many people who are looking for the tools and things to fix my life. But the ultimate fix to our lives is God. It is our faith that we should know this, that we are never so much of a mess or never too far in a mess that we cannot be made right with God. The key thing from this lesson is knowing that Iyanla can't fix your life. You can't fix your life, but God is the one who, through our faith, fixes our messes. He fixes the stuff that we're in, and he makes us right with him. We need to watch what and who we rely on. We must rely on our faith. And the thing about Abraham, the thing that makes him such a strong witness, and he's presented first, is the fact that he had a relationship with God and that he did not depend on himself. Like, to stand there and believe God in that moment when everything else was against him meant necessarily that he knew that it wouldn't take place because of him. So we've got to guard against attitudes of boasting, attitudes of placing confidence in our own records of work. And don't get me wrong, like, I love to be able to celebrate the things that God allows me to do, but your confidence is not in the things that you do. Our good deeds do not save us. When we talk about, people are always talking about you got to put in the work. You do have to put in the work, but the work that you put in is supplying your faith. And that's where God moves. We don't need to try to get right before coming to God. We need to come to God and let him do the work. That's why I told you with Abraham, we don't see a massive altar call with Abraham before he's in this moment in Genesis 15 and lets God do the work in him. The gospel is for everyone. As the promise was made to Abraham, the borders and the guides, they're unlimited. There's nothing that boxes in this gospel. It's for everyone. We are the family. We are heirs to the promise. And here's the last thing I want to tell you. Don't complicate a simple matter. And I said again and again, this lesson is very thick to parse through, but when you get done, don't complicate what is intended to be a simple matter. Here's the simplicity of it. We are saved by faith, and all we need to do is believe. That's our lesson for this week. I am 6 minutes over lunchtime live guidelines. Would y'all pray for me that I can get inside of a 30-minute window? I want to be better. Love you all so much. I look forward to any of the notes that you have. I couldn't read all the comments as I was going through, but I'll go back through. So if you have notes from your study, drop them in as well. And if you're watching the replay, drop in your notes. We all come back here and kind of compare and make sure that we are ready for this weekend. I love y'all so much. Have a super weekend. Stay safe wherever you are. If you need the notes, don't forget that they are on the website as well. The Zoom into Sunday School PowerPoint if you need that. And don't forget to get registered for the conference. September 17th and 18th. If you miss it, I promise you on the 19th, you'll be like kicking yourself because you will have missed it. All right. Have a great rest of your weekend. And I will see you on Sunday when I go live for Sunday School. Take great care. Bye.
Sunday, 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 Sunday. Sunday, 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 Sunday.
This bag makes a great gift for teachers, and of course there's a church school version as well. Visit my Etsy store for this and other great items, and look down below this video for t-shirts for all ages and sizes.
Sunday, 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 Sunday. Sunday, 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 Sunday school. La da da, la da 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 da, la da da, la da 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 da, la da da, la da 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 da. La da da, la da 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 da, la da da, la da 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 da, la da da, la da da, Sunday, Sunday school. Changing the way you see Sunday school with that Sunday.